Welcome to our member chat for climate change. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. I'm Dakota Price, a senior educator for the Life Science Lab.
And hello, everyone. I'm Andy Centers, senior educator in GROW.
Today, Andy and I are going to be asking each other questions about climate change, what it is, what causes it, and this is to provide you all with a better understanding of this topic and how it impacts us and our planet. I'd like to thank everyone who submitted questions to us. We'll be including those in our discussion today as well. To start off with, we have to ask the big question, what is climate change? It's a term that we hear all the time, and it includes a lot of different things. Namely, we use that term to describe rising global temperature caused by human emissions of greenhouse gases. But also we use that term to describe how those rising temperatures create shifting weather patterns around the world. Now, that seems like a complicated topic. There's a lot of different things, different information floating around about it out there. But here at the Science Center, and with me in particular, I don't like to use the word complicated. I prefer to use the word complex. Having a lot of information out there can be overwhelming, and that's okay. But to start understanding a complex topic like climate change, it's best to start at the beginning. It's best to start small. So let's start small. Andy, what is climate?
Yeah, so climate is the overall average of an area. It's rain, it's humidity, it's wind, usually over a period of about 30 years. That usually gives us a pretty good average of climate. Compared to weather, which is like what you kind of watch your morning news for, it kind of gives what today is going to be like. Do I need to bring a jacket? Do I need to wear a sweater? So it'll tell you kind of what's going to happen today. Is it raining? Is it sunny? But the climate is that overall 30-year kind of average of the weather. I like to think about it as like my personality. Over my 30 years of life, I am pretty positive, pretty good, happy-go-lucky personality, and that's my climate. My personality is my climate versus my weather. Last week it was really rainy and kind of gross, and my mood kind of got down. But that's my weather. My kind of day-to-day, I can be down, but overall, I'm pretty happy. That's my climate. So does that kind of give you a good example? Weather?
Good. Yeah, that's a really good way to explain it. That idea that climate is our personality, whereas weather is our day-to-day mood, and how that can change not just day to day, but also sometimes minute to minute. I think that's a really good way to explain it. Thanks.
Yeah. So now that we know a little bit more about like what climate is there something that you can really tell us about climate changing?
Right. So when we talk about climate change, so we know what climate is now, but what is it about that climate that's changing? What's changing is global temperature. The Earth is getting warmer. Now, you've probably heard the term global warming. And while we might not hear that term used as much anymore, that is what's happening. The Earth is getting warmer. The reason that we might not hear the term global warming as much anymore is simply just because we've come to understand that climate change, including global warming, is a lot more complex, as we've discussed, and it involves a lot more than just the Earth getting warmer. So we now use the word climate change so that we can include all of the stuff that's encompassed in what that means. Not just global warming itself, but what that leads to. They're one and the same. They're basically the same thing. But global warming is the root cause of climate change. It's, the base of it as a whole.
Okay, so global warming and climate change pretty much interchangeable for the most part. Mm-hmm. So what's causing global warming?
Right, so this is where we get down to those basics, starting small, starting at the beginning. What's causing global warming is our atmosphere heating up. Now, it's really helpful here to think of our atmosphere as a heat trapping blanket. So the atmosphere is like a blanket that surrounds the Earth. It lets light from the sun pass through to the Earth. It's really important. It keeps our planet warm so that life can exist. But what's great about our atmosphere and what allows life to live here is that that heat trapping blanket, it traps some of that heat, keeping the earth warm. So the earth absorbs some of that warmth from the sun, but some of it is radiated back out, kind of like a mirror, how it would reflect off and bounce back into space. Some of it reflects off, goes back into space, but some of it does get trapped by that atmosphere. And that atmosphere is full of like certain gases that we call heat trapping gases or greenhouse gases that keep some of that heat in. Now, one of those heat trapping gases is carbon dioxide. The thing about how global warming is happening is we use fossil fuels like coal, like oil, like natural gas as energy sources, and using those fossil fuels, burning them adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, to that heat trapping blanket. And since carbon dioxide is a heat trapping gas, that means it makes that blanket around our planet thicker. And just like in winter, you tend to put thicker blankets on your bed to keep warmer. The thicker the blankets on your bed, the warmer you are. The thicker the atmosphere is, our heat trapping blanket, the warmer our planet is going to get. So as we add more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels, that blanket around our planet gets thicker, more heat gets trapped, and that blanket effect leads to warming, which disrupts the climate. So let's talk about carbon dioxide for a minute. Andy, could you tell us what it is?
Yeah, so carbon dioxide, or CO2, is a gas that all animals need. So this is like the regular CO2. This CO2 that we're kind of using or producing after we're burning fossil fuel. So on Earth, there's just kind of regular CO2. But there is this CO2 that we are getting from burning fossil fuels. So by burning fossil fuels, we've kind of created this shortcut in the carbon cycle. The fossil fuels have been in the ground for billions of years. We have dug them up, and now we're burning them again. So all that energy that has been collected through millions of years has now been released in a very short amount of time. And because of that, there's now rampant CO2 that is building up in our atmosphere. And this is causing problems in our ocean and kind of changing the Earth's different ecosystems as well. So when the CO2 builds up, it creates that heat trapping blanket again. And just like you were talking before, Dakota, that leads to that excess heating in our atmosphere.
So basically, we've got kind of that regular CO2, the stuff that we exhale, all animals exhale, and then the plants absorb. And that's kind of the regular stuff. But burning fossil fuels creates extra or rampant CO2, right?
Because that CO2 has been stored underground for a very long amount of time.
Gotcha.
So what's next? What's going to happen next in this whole conversation that we're having today, Dakota?
Ocean happens next.
The ocean. So what's the ocean have to do with this whole topic we're talking about today, this climate change?
The ocean has everything to do with climate change. Now that might surprise a lot of you, but it's important to recognize the part that the ocean has to play in not just, life on Earth as the basis of our, food chains and things like that, but also the role it plays in our global climate. When we talk about climate, it's for a particular location on the world, the climate is influenced by a lot of things like latitude, so how much sunlight it gets. It's influenced by wind patterns, and wind patterns are critical for moving moisture and like precipitation around the globe. Other things that influence local climate includes like being near water, mountains, which influence how air and moisture flows in that location. Now, all of that seems like, okay, cool. But it's important to note that those winds and those water currents are driven, they're powered and propelled by differences in temperature as latitude changes. So how north or south a location is on our globe. because those currents and those wind patterns are influenced by that temperature difference, adding more heat to the atmosphere disrupts those winds and currents. But now we go back to why the ocean? Why does the ocean matter when we're talking about climate change? The ocean matters because the ocean is like our climate's heart. So just like a heart circulates blood and regulates temperature throughout the body, the ocean is responsible and controls the circulation of that heat, that temperature, and the moisture throughout our entire global climate system. So as the heart of the climate's kind of circulatory system, again, if we think about the ocean as the climate heart, the ocean maintains and stabilizes the Earth's temperature by moving heat and moisture around in those wind currents and those water currents. It takes them from the warmer tropics, the warm tropical equator areas of our planet, and it pushes them up towards the polar regions and around through the temperate regions. Think of it like a conveyor belt, or how blood moves from our heart down to our fingertips and our toes and then back up, a cycle. And the ocean also absorbs excess heat in the atmosphere. So temperature changing in the atmosphere can disrupt how that temperature, how that heat and moisture moves around the planet. So that extra heat that's in the atmosphere now is caused by that rampant CO2. Andy, you told us about rampant CO2 earlier. But could you tell us specifically why it is that that rampant CO2 is stressing our climate's heart, is stressing out the ocean?
Yeah, so rampant CO2 stresses our climate. When we burn fossil fuels, we put a lot of stress on the ocean and damage it, really, and its ability to keep the climate stable. So rampant CO2 also turns up the temperature. So we just kind of, that little dial, we just kind of start cranking it up just a little bit on like our stove or our oven. So that just by turning it up just a little bit, that stresses our ocean's ability to successfully move heat and moisture around the globe. Just a little bit of a change. Sometimes it pumps too much heat or moisture. Sometimes it pumps a little bit, not enough moisture or heat in certain areas. This is why we'll see different effects of climate change in different parts of the world. And we'll definitely see different effects here in St. Louis.
Right. So St. Louis is nowhere near the ocean. So how does that affect us? If it's the ocean that's being affected by rising temperatures, we're here in landlocked St. Louis. We don't see any of those immediate effects. But the fact is, we actually do. We think about the ocean as that climate heart, that interconnectedness, just like in a body, and that heart is responsible for maintaining everything else about that body and keeping it alive. Even though where we live here in St. Louis is so far away from the ocean, we still rely on it to keep everything stable. Just like our toes, even though they're far away from our heart, still rely on it even though it's far away. So because that circulating heat and that moisture through the atmosphere relies on those wind and water currents that are pushed around by the ocean, stress on that ocean does impact the climate that we see here in St. Louis, and it happens in visible ways. Now, we remember climate doesn't equal weather. But climate change does influence weather. It has a daily impact around the world, including here. And the most notable differences and effects that we see are unpredictability in weather and the increased frequency of extreme weather. Now, Andy, what do we as St. Louisans usually say about our weather?
Wait 5 minutes and it'll change.
Right. St. Louis and the Midwest in general is notorious for going, oh, it's rainy, it's gross, but wait 5 minutes, it'll change. And yeah, that happens a lot. But even though we feel like our weather is never predictable, it is in most ways. And one of the issues that comes around because of climate change and how it disrupts our climate heart, our ocean, is that our weather here becomes more and more unpredictable. Oh, okay, so the meteorologist got it wrong and they said we didn't need an umbrella and now we suddenly do. that doesn't always seem like a big deal, but it's important to have accurate weather predictions because it's not just for making sure you don't get wet when you leave your house, but it's also important for being prepared for disasters like tornadoes, like flooding, and things like that. Disruptions to that climate heart also contribute to extreme weather events. We have heard over this past year, the past 2 years, the increasing wildfires out west, the intensity of those, how often they're occurring and how hard and fast they're burning. We hear about the increase of hurricanes in the Gulf and on the Atlantic and how there are more and more happening. And again, we're here in St. Louis. How does that affect us? But because the climate's heart, that center of our climate, impacts everything, it's all connected. What happens on those coasts has a domino effect that reaches us here. Some examples are going to include disruptions in the jet stream that flows across the northern hemisphere. If it messes up just a little bit because of a heat change, that kicks a lot of this Arctic cold air. Remember the polar vortex? Those really, really rough, cold, sudden, bitter winters. That can also shift in the other direction, and we have really warm winters. And we get winter tornadoes, which is not great. We also have increased flooding, extra rains. Warmer temperatures up north can lead to faster snow melt, which impacts us down here. And Andy, could you tell us a little bit, since you work in grow and you talk with agriculture, our area is very reliant on agricultural industry. How does that increased flooding in particular actually affect us?
Yeah, I mean, definitely during this time of year, when farmers are out getting their crops ready to get planted, their fields, depending on how they're practicing, if they're plowing fields and stuff. If there's a big rain event, they're going to lose a lot of topsoil. That's just going to wash away, and that's something that you can never get. Also, if rain happens or flooding happens, that's going to be a big loss for that farmer as well if they've already seeded their land. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of negative consequences that farmers are going to have to deal with, with climate change coming up.
Right.
A few years ago, there was a large drought in Missouri. Farmers didn't get to even harvest their crops. They had to, have their livestock eat it. So it's just one of those things that the more we get into these patterns of extreme wet times and extreme dry times, it's going to be a big change on how we grow our food in the United States.
Right. And I mean, I grew up here. I am very familiar with the seasonal flooding that we experience in the area. St. Louisans in the greater St. Louis area, we are surrounded by rivers. Flooding feels like a kind of natural occurrence. It happens all the time. And, as somebody who grew up next to rivers, I had a lot of friends who, because of that seasonal flooding, they would occasionally lose, their homes. They would lose their livelihoods. They would have a lot of damaged properties. And it's, kind of unfortunate. Like I said, we see that as, oh yeah, that's normal. And because we measure climate, we record it over a 30-year average, it's a long time. We might not see those small increases in frequency, kind of just like thinking about it. Oh yeah, it floods all the time. But in reality, if we were to go back and measure those kind of the occurrences, the number of times those happen or how intense those floods get, we can see that it actually does start to increase. You also mentioned droughts, that we had a really bad drought here a few years ago. The number of high heat days is increasing, and heat waves don't just impact crops, they also impact health. High heat days can increase hospitalization visits for people who don't have good internal air conditioning. It's detrimental to people who have respiratory illnesses like asthma, and that's having a negative impact on our communities as well. So yeah, it's, this increased frequency of what we consider extreme weather. No, it might not look like, it's not hurricanes and it's not wildfires. But for us here in the Midwest, those things are also extreme and they do have consequences and heavy impacts on our area.
So Dakota, I have a question. Like this feels pretty, doomy and gloomy, and like, I'm trying to think of like, oh man, this is bad. Like, how do we even go about trying to help out this? Like, how do we change? How do we, what can we do?
So it's important to know that like concern for our climate is normal. This can feel, and in a lot of ways, it does feel like a heavy, kind of scary topic. It's good to know though, and I want to make sure everybody watching this knows that it's not your problem alone, and it's not my problem alone. It's not something that affects just individuals. It affects all of us, not just here in St. Louis, but in the United States, in North America, and around the world. And because it impacts all of us, that also means that it's not up to you alone to solve it. It's not up to me. We all have ways that we can contribute individually to solving the problem of climate change. A lot of us are probably already doing it using reusable water bottles, reusable grocery totes, recycling. Those are all really helpful things that we can do on our own to, kind of come up with solutions for climate change. But because it affects all of us as a whole, as a community, as a country, as, citizens and stewards, people who take care of our planet, the great thing is that there are ways that we can come together as those groups for bigger solutions to make bigger change. As citizens of our planet, it's our responsibility to take care of it. A heart has to be monitored regularly and cared for to make sure that it's healthy, functioning properly. And so taking care of our climate, heart, our ocean is the start of that. And the best care, as always, is preventative care. And preventative care means focusing our solutions on shifting our energy sources. That means moving away from fossil fuels. That means focusing on energy efficiency, reducing demand of fossil fuel usage, and moving to things that are renewable like solar and wind. The cool thing is, like I mentioned, there are lots of community efforts. Action is happening right now, and it's happening here in St. Louis and in our area. Andy, could you tell us about one of the really cool solutions that's happening kind of all over right now with green spaces?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different St. Louis community gardens and kind of rejuvenation gardens kind of going up throughout the city of St. Louis. So areas that, maybe that were just kind of abandoned buildings or vacant lots. They're adding in wildflowers and different things to water from kind of entering our waterways as fast. So that will help, pollution from entering the water, but then it also helps to absorb some of that CO2 in our downtown areas. So yeah, doing a lot of native plantings and having green spaces like that will definitely be something that we need to do in order to, make this kind of climate change thing, finding solutions for it at least.
Right, and I know there are, conservation groups in the area, not just in the city, but in the surrounding counties as well, that hold events for planting trees or putting together community gardens, kind of restoring and increasing those green spaces. St. Louis has a lot of parks, and that's really important. And it's not just great for us as, human beings who enjoy getting outside to walk around in green spaces, but those green plants, they absorb CO2, they use it. And so, having those and increasing the amount of green things to pull that CO2 is really important. And that's something that we can all do together. Another solution that is just as important is, again, we are citizens of not just our area, but of our planet. And being citizens is one of our greatest powers. One of the best solutions we have together as a community is approaching our civic leaders to enact change in our area, to enact change, to come up with solutions for climate change. St. Louis City, as well as some of the surrounding counties, have already passed multiple green energy bills that focus on reducing emissions from greenhouse gases through like building codes, zoning, making sure that certain sized buildings are designed to have solar panels on top. That's a rule. New homes that are being built in certain areas have to meet certain codes that allow for better insulation, so there's less energy being used to keep them warm or keep them cool. And these are all, and they seem like really small things, but have a huge impact on, de-stressing, taking the stress off of our climate heart. And those are things that we're doing as a community, things that we're working on together. As I mentioned before, it's not on you to solve climate change. It's not on me alone. And it's important that you remember that. Like I said, it can feel so overwhelming as a problem, but we are all together, citizens of our planet, and working together to enact that change is what makes the biggest difference. Effective solutions come from people and communities coming together when we all have that same goal of, preserving the place we live, and making those changes at the community level, reaching out to our neighbors and, those around us to work together for that change is really what's the most important.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct with all those points that you hit there.
Yeah, so, it's important to note it's never too late to take action. We're doing it right now. And coming to the Science Center, these are topics that we want to encourage our visitors, for our members to think about, to, know about and be aware that it's, we all have that opportunity and we all have that responsibility to, to take care of the place that we live and the people that we live with. There's always hope. It's never too late. And I think that's the most important thing to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you, Andy, for talking with me. And thank you again to our members for sending in their questions. They were really helpful in, for us putting this together. And as always, as members of the Science Center and visiting us, you can always find educators on the floor to ask more questions about climate change, things that you'd like to know. And we're happy to talk about them. So thank you again. I hope this was informative, and it was great talking about it. Thank you, Andy.
Yep, thank you, Dakota. See you later, Robert.
Bye.